Okay, picture this. Dust rising, a battlefield, northern India, 1191. You've got this ambitious Turkic leader facing off against a famous local king, and the king wins. A huge victory.
Right. Stunning, really.
But then, just 1 year later, they fight again, the rematch. And the outcome, completely different, devastating, and it changes everything for centuries.
That's the stage, yeah.
Or think about ships, not just little trading boats, but like serious naval power projecting influence from South India clear across the ocean.
All the way to Southeast Asia. It's quite something.
These are just glimpses, right? Flashes from this 1,000-year period we're looking at. So much dynamism, conflict, creativity. Welcome to the deep dive.
Today we've got this, well, stack of material, and we're jumping headfirst into medieval Indian history. Roughly, let's say, the 8th to the 18th century.
And it's definitely a dense period. I mean, you've got dynasties popping up, falling apart, constant shifts, trying to keep track of who's who, where across this huge area. It can be a lot. Absolutely. So that's our mission today. We want to cut through some of that density, pull out the really key stuff, understand the big forces at play, the empires, the cultural shifts, those moments that really mattered.
It's not just a list of dates and names. It's about getting the feel, the flow, the significance.
Exactly. Let's unpack it. So picking up around the 8th century, our sources say the Gupta Empire, which had been this huge power in the north, had faded a couple of centuries before. What did that leave?
Well, basically political fragmentation. That big central authority was gone. What you had instead were lots of regional kingdoms.
Competing with each other.
Constantly. Carving out territories, vying for dominance. It was a much more fractured landscape.
Okay. And in the 8th century, 3 big players seemed to emerge, especially in the north and central areas. Who were they?
Right. So you've got the Gurjara-Pratiharas. They were mainly based in Malwa, but pushed into the Ganges plain, really important territory. Very. Then, over in the east, in Bengal, you had the Palace. The sources really highlight them as patrons of Buddhism, supporting places like Nalanda University.
Famous Nalanda.
Indeed. And then, down in the Deccan, central India, you had the Rashtrakutas. Their capital was Manyaketa. So these 3 are the big ones in that northern central zone early on.
And while they're battling it out up there, the sources also mentioned the Cholas starting to rise in the south. Right, we'll get back to them, but it's interesting they're already on the scene.
Precisely. It's important to note their early presence, because they end up taking a very different path, building this major maritime power later on.
And religion was shifting too.
Yeah, in North India particularly, you see Hinduism gaining ground, becoming more prominent, while Buddhism, which had been strong, was seeing a bit of a decline in that region.
Okay, so let's focus on those 3 northern powers, Pratiharas, Palasas, Rashtrakutas. The sources talk about this intense struggle between them.
Yes, the tripartite struggle. It wasn't short either. It went on for decades. And the main prize they were fighting over was the city of Kannauj.
Kannauj. Why was it so crucial?
Location, location, location. Control Kannauj, you control access to the fertile plains, major trade routes. It gave you huge leverage in North India. So naturally, all 3 wanted it.
And specific rulers get mentioned.
Oh yeah, like Nagabhata II of the Pratiharas. He managed to capture Kannauj for a time. Dharmapala the Palas held it earlier. And the Rashtrakuta kings, like Dhruva and Govinda III, even though they were based way down in the Deccan, they'd actually invade northwards just to get involved in this fight.
Wow. But the interesting thing is, after all that fighting over one city, nobody actually managed to hold on to it permanently.
That's the key takeaway. It became this constant back and forth. One dynasty gains an edge, another challenges, the third jumps in, and the end result. It really just weakened all 3 of them.
So it stopped any one of them from becoming the dominant power across North India then?
Exactly. It prevented that kind of consolidation at that specific time. The struggle itself sort of exhausted them.
That's fascinating. The fight for one city having such huge long-term consequences created a sort of power vacuum. All right, moving ahead a bit. As those 3 big powers declined, the north and central areas saw, well, lots of smaller kingdoms emerge, often led by Rajput clans.
Yes, this is where the Rajput era really comes into focus. Different clans establishing control over different regions, operating more independently.
And some of these names are really famous, like the Chahamanas or Chauhans of Ajmer. Prithviraj Chauhan, specifically.
A legendary figure, absolutely. Most famous for those battles of terrain against Muhammad Ghori. That first one, 1191, Prithviraj pulls off this incredible victory.
He's stunning.
But then Ghori comes back, 1192, the second battle. And that one, That was a decisive defeat for Prithviraj, and our sources mark that as a huge turning point.
A critical moment. We'll come back to why. What other Rajput dynasties get a mention?
Well, you have the Paramaras of Malwa. Their king Raja Bhoja is remembered as this great scholar king figure. Then the Chandellas of Bundelkhand, their big legacy is probably the Khajuraho temples. Amazing sculptures. And the Tamaras of Delhi. Anandpal Tomar is credited with actually founding Delhi.
But there was a weakness there, wasn't there? The sources point out something about these Rajput kingdoms.
Yes. The recurring theme is that they often fought amongst themselves. Lots of internal rivalries and conflicts.
Which, while maybe leading to vibrant local cultures, probably didn't help when facing external threat.
Made them collectively more vulnerable, yeah.
Okay, so while the Rajputs are dominant in the North Center, the South is developing its own major powers simultaneously. We mentioned the early Cholas. Who else?
Right. So the Pallavas in Tamil Nadu, based around Kanchipuram. Rulers like Narasimhavarman, known for pioneering those rock-cut temples. Very distinctive. Then the Cholas, again, based in Thanjavur, they become incredibly powerful. You have kings like Rajaraja, he built the massive Brihadiswara temple, and his son, Rajendra III. This guy wasn't just fighting on land, he led major naval expeditions.
To Southeast Asia, you said. That's serious reach.
It really underscores their ambition. They were a major maritime force. You also had the Chalukyas, different branches like Badami, Western, Eastern Chalukyas, big players in the Deccan and South. And the Rashtrakutas pop up again here too, founded by Danti Durga, known for scholar kings like Amoghavarshafer.
So across India during this, let's call it early medieval phase, you have this mosaic of regional powers. The Kannauj fighters, the Rajputs, the southern dynasties. Beyond just fighting, what was their collective impact? What do the sources say?
Well, they were all huge patrons of culture, building grand temples, supporting art, literature. Their economies were largely agrarian, based on land taxes, often with really sophisticated irrigation projects backing that up.
Okay. Now, into this mix comes a new element. Invasions from outside the immediate region. The sources point the first big one.
That would be the Arab invasion of Sind, 711-712 CE, led by Muhammad bin Qasim. He defeated the local ruler, Raja Dahir.
And established rule there.
Yes, Arab rule was established in Sind. But it's important, as the sources note, this was the start of Muslim rule in part of India. It wasn't yet a widespread conquest of the whole subcontinent.
Right, geographically limited at first. The next major wave comes later, involving Turkic groups.
Yeah, starting around the late 10th century, going into the 12th. The first really big name is Mahmud of Ghazni. The sources really emphasize his relentless campaigns. They mention 17 major raids between 1000 and 1027.
17! That's a lot! And he's known for attacking wealthy temples, like Somnath.
Exactly. His raids were largely focused on plunder, seizing wealth. He caused a lot of destruction. But, like the earlier Arab invasion, his goal wasn't really long-term conquest and administration of vast Indian territories. That dynamic changes with the next major figure, Muhammad Ghori.
Which brings us back to Prithviraj Chauhan and those battles of terrain.
It does. As we said, Ghori lost the first one in 1191. But he didn't give up. He came back in 1192 and won the second battle. And the sources are very clear. This victory wasn't just another raid.
This was different.
Fundamentally different. Ghori's win in 1192 paved the way for establishing a permanent Muslim ruling power based in North India.
So that second battle, it's not just a military shift. It really kicks off a whole new era in Indian history. A new power structure is about to take hold.
Precisely, the Delhi Sultanate.
Right, the Delhi Sultanate, ruling large parts of North India for, what, over 3 centuries? 1206 to 1526, roughly?
That's the time frame. And it wasn't just one family ruling the whole time. Our sources break it down into 5 distinct dynasties that took power one after the other.
Starting with the Mamluks, sometimes called the Slave Dynasty.
Yes, founded by Qutbuddin Aibak. He was actually one of Muhammad Ghori's generals. He started building the Qutb Minar complex in Delhi. But his successor, Iltutmish, is really seen as the one who consolidated the Sultan's power.
How so?
Well, the sources mention he introduced key administrative stuff like the standardized silver coin, the tanka, a concrete detail showing state building.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The sources also mention Razia Sultana uniquely, the only female ruler of the Sultanate. And then Balban, who's known for really centralizing authority, cracking down on dissent.
Okay, after the Mamluks came the Khiljis.
And the standout ruler here is Alauddin Khilji. The sources paint him as incredibly impactful. For one thing, he managed to fight off the Mongol invasions.
For a serious threat,
A
right?
huge, constant threat from the northwest. Repelling them was massive. He's also known for major economic and administrative reforms.
Like what specifically?
The sources talk about his market reforms controlling prices of essential goods, fixing wages, also a land tax system based on actually measuring the land. Pretty advanced stuff for the time.
Why did he do all that?
Partly to support his enormous army needed to fight the Mongols and expand, also to curb hoarding and ensure supplies. And he did expand the Sultanate significantly, pushing down into the Deccan.
Quite a figure. Then came the Tughlaqs.
Right. This dynasty had rulers with big ideas. Muhammad bin Tughlaq is famous, or maybe infamous, for ambitious but failed experiments, like trying to introduce token currency, copper, and brass coins. And that massive disruptive move of shifting the capital temporarily from Delhi way down to Daulatabad.
Didn't work out so well.
Not really. Costly and caused immense hardship. In contrast, his successor, Firuz Shah Tughlaq, focused more on public works canals, hospitals, mosques. A different approach.
And the last two dynasties, the Sayyids and Lodis.
Generally, the sources indicate a period of weakening central control under them, more internal problems, shrinking territory. The Lodi dynasty ended when Ibrahim Lodi was defeated by Babur.
At the First Battle of Panipat, 1526.
Exactly. And that battle marks the end of the Delhi Sultanate itself.
So what's life actually like under these sultans? The sources give us some ideas about administration, the economy, culture.
Well, at the top, you had the Sultan's supreme authority, supported by key ministers. The wazir is mentioned, sort of the chief minister handling finance, and the Diwan-e-Riz, the military department head.
But how did they manage this huge empire day to day? The sources talk about the Iqta system.
Ah, yes, the Iqta system. This was absolutely crucial. Basically, the Sultanate's territory was divided into land grants, or Iqtas. These were given to military commanders or nobles called mutis or walis.
And what did they do?
Their job was to collect revenue from their Iqta. They'd use part of it to maintain their own troops and keep order locally. Then they had to send the surplus revenue back to the Sultan in Delhi and provide soldiers when the Sultan needed them.
So it's kind of decentralized, but still tied to the center through revenue and military obligations.
Precisely. And we saw rulers like Alauddin Khilji trying more direct interventions too, like those price controls and land measurements.
What about the broader society and economy?
Overwhelmingly agrarian. Most people were peasants. Key taxes mentioned are kharaj, the land tax, and jizya. The sources specify jizya as a poll tax on non-Muslims who received state protection.
Was there much trade?
Oh yes. Significant growth in trade and cities. Textiles were huge: cotton, silk, carpets. Cities like Delhi, Agra, Cambay became major hubs for both internal trade within India and external trade, especially connecting to Central Asia.
And the social structure.
Hierarchical, as you'd expect. Ruling elite, nobles, religious scholars at the top. The sources also mention slavery was common, often involving prisoners of war, although some enslaved people could rise to high positions.
Sounds like a complex society. What were the main problems they faced?
Plenty. Famines were recurrent, given the reliance on agriculture. The Mongol threat was almost constant pressure from the northwest. And internal revolts happened frequently, often sparked by heavy taxes or unhappy governors.
But despite these struggles, it was also a time of major cultural flowering, especially in architecture, right?
Absolutely. This is where you really see that blending of traditions. Persian Islamic styles, arches, domes, minarets start merging with existing Indian building techniques and decorative styles, a real fusion.
And specific buildings show this.
Definitely. The Qutb Minar complex is iconic, marking the start of the era. The Alai Darwaza, within that complex, built by Alauddin Khilji, is noted for its early successful use of the true arch and dome, a technical achievement. Tughlaqabad Fort shows their massive defensive style, and the Lodi tombs represent the later Sultanate architecture.
What about language and literature?
Persian became the dominant language of the court and administration. This really connected the Sultanate to the wider Persian-speaking world culturally.
And there's one figure who keeps coming up in the sources, embodying this cultural blend.
Yeah.
Amir Khusrau.
He's a giant of the period, multifaceted, a major Persian poet, but he also wrote in early forms of Hindi, Hindavi. He was a devoted disciple of the great Sufi saint Nizamuddin Auliya, and he's credited with huge contributions to music, developing Qawwali.
Qawwali, the devotional music.
Exactly. He really bridges different cultural streams. We also have historians like Ziauddin Barani writing detailed chronicles. Recording history was important then.
Okay, so while all this political drama with the Sultanate is unfolding, there are these other powerful currents shaping society, the Bhakti and Sufi movements.
Hugely important.
Yeah.
These were spiritual and cultural movements happening sort of alongside, sometimes intersecting with the political sphere, but having a massive impact on ordinary people.
Let's start with Bhakti. How did the sources describe it?
As a devotional movement, the core idea is Bhakti's intense personal devotion and love for a chosen deity, usually forms of Vishnu or Shiva. It stressed this emotional connection over, say, complex rituals or needing priests as intermediaries.
And it had a social angle, too.
A very strong one. Many Bhakti saints actively challenged the caste system and social hierarchy. Some came from lower castes themselves. They deliberately used regional languages, Tamil, Kannada, Hindi, etc., not just Sanskrit, to write their hymns and poems, making their message accessible to everyone.
It started earlier in the south, then spread north, and the sources list quite a few key figures.
Yes. Early on in the south, you have the Alvars, devoted to Vishnu, and Nayanars, devoted to Shiva, writing these amazing Tamil hymns. Later, figures like Basava in Karnataka, promoting Virashaivism, which strongly opposed caste. Then in the north, Ramananda was a major influence, and his disciples included Kabir.
Ah, Kabir. He seems to bridge traditions, doesn't he?
Absolutely. The sources highlight his syncretic approach, drawing from both Hindu and Islamic ideas. His dohas, those short couplets, are powerful critiques of religious hypocrisy, rituals, caste, advocating for a direct, formless divine. He really embodies that blending.
And others. Guru Nanak, founder of Sikhism, preaching monotheism, equality.
Mirabai, the Rajput princess devoted to Krishna, famous for her bhajans or devotional songs. Surdas, the blind poet whose Sursagar focuses on Krishna. And Tulsidas, who retold the Ramayana in Awadhi Hindi, his Ramcharitmanas, making the epic widely accessible.
What was the overall impact of this Bhakti wave?
Significant. It challenged the authority of orthodox Brahminical practices. It promoted ideas of equality and inclusion. It spurred the growth of literature in regional languages, and it helped shape a more personal, devotional form of Hindu identity for many.
And running parallel to Bhakti was the Sufi movement, which the sources describe as Islamic mysticism.
Right. Sufism focused on the inner spiritual path within Islam, emphasizing love for God, inner purity, service to humanity. Like Bhakti, it often interacted with local traditions and aimed for a direct experience of the divine, rather than just following external rules.
The Chishti order was particularly big in India.
Very influential. Key saints mentioned include Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, who brought the order to India, emphasizing charity and love, Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki, and maybe the most famous, Nizamuddin Auliya in Delhi.
What was special about him?
His compassion was legendary, and his Khanqahs, his hospice or spiritual center, was known for being open to everyone. People of all faiths were welcome there.
That's remarkable, that openness.
It really is. It shows that spirit of inclusion. And we mentioned Amir Khusrau, Nizamuddin's disciple, developing Qawwali music, which became central to Sufi gatherings, the Sama.
So Sufi practices involved meditation, music, gathering in these Khanqahs.
Yes. And their influence spread widely. They played a big role in introducing Islam in many areas, often attracting people through their piety and inclusive message. And crucially, the sources stressed the interaction between Bhakti and Sufism. They weren't in totally separate boxes.
They influenced each other, shared ideas.
Definitely. They shared common ground in challenging rigid orthodoxy, emphasizing love and devotion over ritual, and promoting a more inclusive spirituality.
It's fascinating, isn't it? These two major spiritual movements from different origins finding so much common ground on love, devotion, inclusion, especially during a time often defined by political conflict. How did that synthesis manage to thrive?
It's a great question. Okay, so as the Delhi Sultanate's power faded, particularly from the 14th century on, the sources show regional kingdoms becoming strong and independent again. Yeah, the map fragments once more. Powerful provincial kingdoms assert themselves across India.
Let's look at the north and west first. Any key ones?
The Bengal Sultanate gets mentioned. Known for being prosperous, lots of trade, strong Persian cultural influence. The Adina Mosque is a famous structure there. Then the Jaunpur Sultanate, called the Shiraz of India for its patronage of learning. Distinctive Sharqi architecture, like the Atala Mosque.
Gujarat had its own sultanate, too.
A very wealthy one. Those ports like Cambay were crucial for trade. It was also a cultural hub. The Sidi Sayed Mosque in Ahmedabad is mentioned, famous for its incredibly intricate stone lattice work, the Jali.
That delicate stone carving, yeah. Beautiful detail.
It really is. Further north, Kashmir had its own rulers. One gets special mention. Zainul Abidin, known as Buddha, praised for his religious tolerance.
And one Rajput kingdom is noted for holding out, resisting northern powers.
Mewar in Rajasthan. Figures like Rana Sanga are highlighted. He actually fought Babur at the Battle of Kanwa in 1527. That battle kind of points towards the next big chapter, the Mughals.
Okay, moving south again. The Deccan Sultanates. These emerged from another kingdom breaking up.
Yes, they came out of the fragmentation of the Bahmani Sultanate, which itself had been a major power in the Deccan since the mid-14th century.
And there were 5 main Deccan Sultanates that resulted.
That's right. Bijapur, Ahmednagar, Golconda, Berar, and Bidar. They developed this really rich, distinct Deccani culture, a mix of northern, Persian, and local southern influences. Great builders, too. Forts, palaces, mosques.
Any famous examples?
Sure. Golgambaz in Bijapur, with its enormous dome. Golconda Fort near Hyderabad, associated with the Qadbi Shahi rulers who founded Hyderabad. Ibrahim Adil Shah II of Bijapur was a noted patron of arts. And Chand Bibi is remembered for her resistance in Ahmednagar.
And these 5 sultanates, they got along?
Not really. Lots of conflict among themselves. And critically, constant conflict with the other major power in the south at the time, the Vijayanagara Empire.
Right. That brings us to the 2 southern giants of this later period, Vijayanagara and Bahmani. Let's take Vijayanagara first, founded mid-14th century.
1336. By Harihara Aya and Bukharayahi, the sources really emphasize their motivation, resisting the northern sultanate's expansion and protecting Hindu traditions in the south. Their capital, Vijayanagara, modern Hampi, was magnificent.
And it had a golden age under one particular ruler.
Yes, Krishnadevaraya, early 16th century. He expanded the empire, boosted trade, including with the Portuguese who were arriving then, and was a huge patron of arts and Telugu literature. He even wrote a famous work himself, the Amukta Malyada.
Wow. And administration. The sources mention a Nyankara system and lots of irrigation.
Yeah, the Nyankar system was sort of feudal-like. Agriculture was key, supported by massive irrigation projects, tanks, canals, very practical stuff. They traded spices, textiles, and importantly, horses, which they needed for their armies.
And the art and architecture, Dravidian-style temples. Hampi must be amazing.
Incredible. The Virupaksha temple is still active, but the Vitala temple complex is stunning, famous for intricate carvings, the stone chariot, and those amazing musical pillars.
Musical pillars, stone pillars that make music when tapped. Seriously.
It sounds incredible, but yes, a real testament to their craftsmanship. A surprising, unique feature.
But Vijayanagara doesn't last forever. It had a dramatic end.
It did. The Battle of Talikota in 1565. The Deccan Sultanates actually banded together against Vijayanagara and defeated them decisively. The capital was sacked, destroyed. The empire basically fell apart after that.
And its main rival for much of its history was the Bahmani kingdom.
Right. Founded slightly earlier, 1347, by Alauddin Hassan Bahman Shah, or Hassan Gangu. Capitals at Gulbarga, then Bidar. Rulers like Feroz Shah Bahmani are noted for promoting culture, that Indo-Persian blend.
Patrons of Persian learning, too.
Yes, and architecture. Sources mention the Charminar in Gulbarga, apparently an earlier one, not the famous Hyderabad landmark, and the distinctive Bijaware metalcraft from Bidar.
And their relationship with Vijayanagara was mostly conflict.
Constant rivalry. The sources are clear. They fought repeatedly, especially over the Raichur Doab, that fertile land between the Krishna and Tungabhadra rivers. Very valuable territory.
So how did the Bahmani kingdom end? It didn't fall to Vijayanagara.
No, it weakened from within. Internal conflicts, factionalism between different groups of nobles, the local Deccanis versus nobles from Persia and Central Asia. This internal strife led to its gradual breakup into those 5 independent Deccan sultanates we talked about, starting early 16th century.
So Vijayanagara and Bahmani were these 2 huge southern powers shaping the region for centuries, largely defined by their rivalry. It really shows how interconnected and often adversarial things were.
Okay, so we've covered 1,000 years here. From that post-Gupta fragmentation, the early regional fights like the Tripartite struggle, through the Turkic invasions setting up the Delhi Sultanate, its rise and eventual fall.
While alongside that, you have these incredibly powerful spiritual movements, Bhakti and Sufi, emphasizing devotion, inclusion, using local languages.
Right. And then the reemergence of strong regional kingdoms everywhere, north, west, south, culminating in that great rivalry between Vijayanagara and Bahmani down south.
It's just so complex and dynamic. Not one single story, is it? It's this weave of conflict, yes, but also coexistence. Cultural mixing, amazing art, deep spiritual searching. Kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall. Battles are won and lost. But you also have saints and poets preaching love and equality in a way that clearly resonated with people.
Exactly. Intense political struggles happening at the same time as movements trying to bridge divides.
So thinking about all that, the constant shifts in power, the fragmentation, the conflicts, but also this undeniable cultural and spiritual synthesis, especially seen in Bhakti and Sufi ideals finding common ground. What does this whole thousand-year stretch leave you, the listener, thinking about? What enduring questions about power, about identity, about human connection does it raise?